Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Burek, the producer of today's webinar for the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation. The webinar is entitled Russian Invasion Against Ukraine Brings Extraordinary Challenges in Humanitarian Demining. The U.S.-Ukraine Foundation was founded in 1991 and has been helping to develop civil society and the economy in Ukraine, and also to facilitate cultural exchanges. I've been with the foundation since 2008 in various roles. Currently, I'm on the advisory board, and I also help produce some of their webinars. Since the Russian invasion against Ukraine started in February of 2022, USUF has produced a number of different webinars about topics of concern related to the war. So today's topic on demining in Ukraine is a critical one. Just to cite some statistics about it, the Wilson Center, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C., has estimated that about 28% of Ukrainian territory, or 170,000 square kilometers, is currently mined, full of ordnance or other explosive devices. And just recently in the UK, the Tony Blair Institute published a report funded by the Howard Buffett Foundation from the US that says it will cost somewhere between $35 billion and $36 billion to effectively demine Ukraine so that the land will be available for civilian use again. The Ukrainian government itself has suggested that they would like to see 80% of their land back in agricultural use, the land that's been mined, within a 10-year period. And they've also indicated that it costs Ukraine in economic damages about $11.2 billion a year because of the effects of the land mines, ordnance, and explosive devices. So obviously, this is a major problem, not only during the war, but going forward in the reconstruction and redevelopment of Ukraine. So with that in mind, we have an expert moderator today, Denys Gurak, who is the CEO and co-founder of A.D.A.M, which is a pioneering 3D bioprinting company focused on creating 3D printed bones and advancing personalized tissue manufacturing. Denys is an expert on the defense industry in Ukraine, having been the Deputy Director General of Ukraine's defense industry, now also a co-founder of MITS Capital, a venture firm. He's also involved in a number of think tanks around the world, in particular with the Potomac Foundation as a senior fellow in Washington, D.C. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Denys.
Thank you, Mike, for such an introduction. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to welcome our attendee today, Chris Whatley. I just wanted to mention that how I'm related to the topic. During my tenure at the Ukrainian defense industry, A.D.A.M Service, a company which is doing demining, like a main demining entity in Ukraine, was under my supervision. So we worked on legislative changes. I understand how technologies work, and I'm mostly involved now in developing defense technologies. So we, as a VC firm, we have an approach to demining, and obviously that's one of tech areas that we're looking at. So that's kind of my relation to the topic. I wasn't sure if it was clear from the Mike's introduction. So Chris, you've just been to Ukraine. What are your impressions? What's on your mind? And if you would want to introduce yourself, your work in Ukraine, that would be great, a place to start.
Sure. Thanks, Denys. And I'm Chris Whatley. I'm Executive Director of the Halo Trust USA. So the Halo Trust is the world's largest landmine clearance NGO. We've got operations in 30 countries. To the extent that anyone can remember who we are, it's probably an image from 1997 in Angola from Princess Diana visiting our work. But Ukraine is really the center of gravity for our work worldwide right now. And the reason for that is obvious, for all those statistics that Mike mentioned, for the news cycle that we all pay attention to. But from Halo's side, side, we've been working in Ukraine since 2016. So we got to remind ourselves, and everyone on this line is, a expert consumer of the conflict context. But we got to remind ourselves that there was a landmine problem in Ukraine that predated February of 2022. And if you think of the beginning of February of that year, at that point, Halo's operations were concentrated in the Donbass. Mariupol was one of our primary areas of operations, the areas to the east of Mariupol, because remember that first phase of the conflict, Mariupol had been briefly held by the separatists, and they were pushed out, and in the areas to the east, you had some substantial landmine challenges to be dealt with, and then Kramatorsk, an area that's really in the epicenter of the conflict right now, unfortunately, or on the road, or the conflict is on the road to Kramatorsk at the moment. So we had 414 Ukrainian deminers working for the Halo Trust, and that's our model, that we have a small group of technical experts who are expats from around the world, not just British or American, but from all different countries, who serve as kind of the technical leadership team on a program. But the overwhelming majority, 99%, are Ukrainians who we hire and train, and who really become the leadership of the program at the operational level, and lead the teams on the ground who are doing the clearance. So on February 21st, we had 414 staff, based out of those areas, Kramatorsk, Mariupol, but also up in Luhansk, the northern, the aspect of Luhansk that was still within Ukrainian control. About half of that staff either immediately mobilized into the Ukrainian forces. They took off their Halo body armor and put on the Ukrainian uniform and went to fight for their country, as all of us can appreciate. Or they were caught behind Russian lines. So really, half our staff remained by February 23rd. And that's a staff that we were able to evacuate back to Kyiv and reestablish a new program using that staff as the nucleus of it, really just outside of Kyiv and Brovary, which Denys will know quite well. And many people on the line will. And what we did is we used that nucleus of really experienced Halo staff leaders, of task leaders, unit commanders, of team leaders, to train a new generation of Ukrainian employees, Ukrainians who were from all walks of life, who were walking into Halo's operations and saying, "How do I help?" Whether they were a software engineer, in a month before, or whether they were, an entertainer. We've got people from all walks of life who walked in and wanted to help. And from that, we've expanded to what we have right now, which is a staff of 1,200 Ukrainian deminers. So a 6x increase off of that nadir of 200 staff. And where are they operating? Well, they're operating in the areas where the Russians were pushed back. So if you think about the operations second half of 2022, maybe first half of 2023, a big focus of our work were those areas where the Russians were stopped at the gates of Kyiv, so around Bucha and Irpin, and further afield in the Oblast around Kyiv. We still have some teams there, and there's still some work to be done. But really, for us, the focus now has been clearing those areas where the Ukrainian forces were so successful in the fall of 2022 into November of 2022, pushing the Russians back from Mykolaiv, from the areas around Kharkiv, these very large, often agricultural lands, and that connects to that economic argument that comes from the Buffett-Blair study, which has been quite helpful to have it come out so recently. But these agricultural lands that have been, such the key to Ukraine's economy and its ability to not only fund its economy, but feed the world. And it's why Ukraine is such an important, cause for anyone who cares about international affairs or food security. So our operations are really focused to those areas, and I'm coming back from spending time with our operations in Mykolaiv, but then also back up to Kyiv to interact with our teams up there. But that gives you a sense of the scale of our work. Now, we're one part of a larger effort and a supporting one. Ultimately, it is the Ukrainian government and aspects within it, such as the state emergency services, which are part of the Ministry of Interior, that are the real heroes in this fight. They are the first responders to that farmer who hits an anti-tank mine and has suddenly they've lost a critical component of their livelihood and hopefully not been injured in the process. They're the first responders. They do immediate assessments and clear some of the ordnance, whether it's unexploded ordnance from recent strikes or whether it is a landmine that was left in the fall of 2022 by the Russians. But then they bring us in, and they bring in other NGOs like us, and there's a whole universe of us that adds up to about 5,000 deminers. We're a very significant component of it. But when you take all of the different aspects of the Ukrainian government that are doing demining, when you take all of the different NGOs that are doing it, that's about what that total adds up to. And from our side, to give you a sense of what we're clearing. So if you picture that map, you've got major focus of operations in Kharkiv out east, and you've got a major focus of operations in Kherson and Mykolaiv in the south. And to date, up until this point, from February, when we built up this new aspect of the program and that phase of the war until really the last month or so, we've cleared about 10,000 anti-tank mines and about 1,000 anti-personnel mines. So that 10-to-1 ratio tells you something. It tells you that anti-tank mines or anti-vehicle mines have been such a key component of this conflict. They are not covered by the Mine Ban Convention. They are something that are in the arsenals of many nations, but certainly for the Russians, they were laid at industrial scale. And they present the greatest threat that we have at the moment. And certainly, if you're a farmer who is wondering if your land is truly touched by explosives, is truly too hazardous for you to operate. So maybe you evacuated back in 2022, you're coming back, it's been fallow, and there's all kinds of overgrowth on top of it. The challenge is that even though the Russians surface laid a lot of those anti-tank mines, so they did it quickly, and you would think they would be easy to clear, but you've got all of that overgrowth. You're going to get into your tractor and you're going to take a risk. And so many of the casualties have come from that very thing. So there have been over 1,000 landmine accidents with about 1,500, 1,600, depending on the stats, actual casualties. And quite often it is that farmer in their tractor. And as a result, even though those 1,600 casualties in the context of Ukraine's suffering at the hands of the Russians and all the other different casualties from this conflict, may seem relatively modest, but that creates a climate of fear it basically locks away economic output. All of those lands that are so essential for Ukraine's economy and global food prices and feeding the Horn of Africa become locked away by fear. And so, I'm just going to pause there for a second. That gives you a sense of who we are and what we're doing. Wanted to see if you had any follow-up questions, Denys, before I kind of get into aspects of the challenges before us and what the next things are for Halo and what I see from on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah, it seems like you're very passionate about what you do, and thank you for doing this for Ukraine. I wanted to ask you first whether you think the assessment in the Tony Blair's report is accurate. What would you add? Have you had a chance to read it? Just if you could tell us a couple of words about that, that would be great.
I have. I think it's a great report, and it's filling in, a really important information need in that within the context of the mine action threat, I think that we need to focus on enabling economic activity. I mean, I've touched upon it in this talk so far. So I'm very grateful that the Blair Institute and the Buffett Foundation have both, invested the thought leadership in this, and actually are kind of pointing towards the direction that operators like us have to take, which is, how do we ensure that we invest in the interventions that can most quickly get economic activity going back in place? So, I think it's a great report. I think that there's, you need to unpack the layers on this challenge. You've got what the government of Ukraine mentions, that 170,000 square kilometers, which I'm an American, so I like to think of that in terms of American geography. It's easier for me. That's basically the state of Florida. So then you unpack that a little bit more, and you see that, about 100,000 of those square kilometers are actually, under Russian control right now. So they need to be cleared eventually. They need to be dealt with and assessed, but we can't get to them right now. So what we really need to do is focus on that 67,000 or so square kilometers that are under Ukrainian control and that do pose a threat to economic activity and could be stood up more quickly. And that means that you've moved from a challenge that's the size of the state of Florida to the size of the state of West Virginia, or if you're thinking of in country terms, it's more like the challenge that we can deal with right now is more like the size of the country of Bosnia Herzegovina or something like that. So that, just to take your point, I very much agree with the findings of the report, and it's timely. For us, it just gets down to, what do we do next? That from our side, no matter how much you shrink this threat down, and it's helpful to think in terms of what's accessible and what can be dealt with, the most important thing we can do is clear fear. So you've got this vast area, and the best way, and parts of it are not actually touched by explosives. They don't necessarily have landmines in the ground, but there's been fighting close enough to it that you're worried, and you as a farmer aren't confident going back into your field. So the first thing we got to do is survey all that. It's a technical process that mine operators like us do that involves everything from sending out teams that interview the community and talk to the farmers themselves. You run drones over the top of everything. You analyze it with satellite imagery. You look back over time at the conflict and maybe even look for flashpoints in fields. But all of that is about determining where the explosives aren't. And that's the most important thing we can do, because when you do these assessments, you may have an area that is out of production that's 1,000 hectares. But once you do that survey assessment, once you get your teams on the ground and you look at it and you talk to people, you run the drones over the top of it, you look back over time, you can narrow that down to maybe 10% that truly needs to be cleared. And the key is making sure that farmer gets back on that other 90%. Now, that's going to take some additional confidence building, in part because you've got farmers that are traumatized. So one of the things that we've been doing is investing, thanks to the support of the Buffett Foundation, in autonomous machines that can be used for both confidence building on land that we don't think has been touched by conflict, but what you want to prove it definitely hasn't, but also for clearance approaches in those areas where we are going to have to go in and clear. But the first priority is clearing fear through survey and providing confidence to those farmers who you've said, hey, 90% of your field is free of explosives, but ensuring that they have the confidence to get back on their combines, get back on their tractors. That's the biggest challenge, is that clearing the fear side. But let me pause there.
Yeah. So you touched upon technologies. That was my next question. There are a couple of Ukrainian startups working on this. Obviously, global R&D is also working on this. If you think about it, for the large areas, probably the approach hasn't changed. It's still going to be an armored vehicle with this attachment in the front of it that analyzes and clears the mine. But that's just my opinion. However, for mine detection, I think that's where the technology leap happened the most. So would love to hear your thought on whether there's room for technologies and like what percentage of the whole, demining capability new technologies are occupying now, and how it's going to be in future.
Well, it's a great question, and I would say, there's going to be a made in Ukraine solution and a series of made in Ukraine solutions and innovations on both that detection side, but also in kind of rolling out clearance capacity in these more traditional ways, as you say, Denys, at scale. In that, this is a tragic conflict. All of us believe that, or else we're not on this call. But the one silver lining is Ukraine is one of the most innovative countries in the world. It's the only program in the world where, I turn to my right and the person who's out in the minefield has a master's degree in engineering. We have so many, innovative people on our staff as Halo, much less in the broader, entrepreneurial space and innovation space within the Ukrainian economy. And I think it's why, the Ministry of Economy itself has played such a lead role in demining in Ukraine, in part because there's a recognition that there are solutions that can be driven from within the country, and there are. I would say on the detection side, from our side, we are still, swinging detectors that they have some innovation in them. They've evolved over the last 20 years or so. There's ground penetrating radar that complements the metal detection side, but there's a lot more work that could be done on that side of detection. So using, various new approaches to look into the ground and see what's there, and examine other aspects of the spectrum that might enable that. That's a little bit beyond our remit. We're going to have to operate with the detectors that we can get from the market right now. But I would say what's been most exciting is just use of drone technology and satellite imagery at scale, in that we are, we're able to detect landmines, in part because so many were surface laid, but also just because there's so much imagery available in Ukraine, there are so many resources, that using AI approaches to analyze those terabytes of data is a really key priority for us. We are fortunate that we have a partnership with AWS where they're providing pro bono support to do a lot of that analysis on the back end, and we'll keep doing what we do, but it's designed to replace the human eye of one of our great survey teams who goes out there and meets with everybody, but then they've got massive sets of photo imagery from both the drones we operate, but the satellite imagery that we're able to feed into, and basically turn that into an AI model so that we find those mine lines faster, and we're able to draw the perimeters in those fields that we're going to clear tighter.
Which efficiency does it give? Can you calculate?
The biggest thing is just the efficiency is in our own man hours, and that if you send a survey team out, and they are working in these vast areas, so our area of operations within that 67,000 square kilometers that is available to the Ukrainian government to be able to access, and not the area that's under Russian control, is about half that. And so there's this vast area that still needs to be surveyed, so that you can assess what's the 90% the farmer can get back into the field, and what's the 10% that needs to be cleared. And it's the time efficiency of not having to manually go through frame by frame drone images, looking at thermal profiles and trying to pick out a row of anti-tank mines. Having that done automatically by an AI model is just a huge efficiency and time alone.
And how would you estimate the need for such a solution, like assuming that all of that area would have been cleared by just drones with AI? So how much time and how much money does it take?
The money side requires, a level, is beyond my pay grade. I mean,
Mm,
the figures that are in the Blair and Buffett report,
mhm,
which also, rely on World Bank
mhm,
figures, are, important, and because they are sitting there saying, with current technology and current timelines, this is what it would take. Um,
mhm.
we're
And
looking to
they're calculating the whole territory, right? Yeah.
exactly.
So,
Uh,
so if it's
so
if it's
from our
36
side,
billion,
well,
sorry
yes,
for talking about money.
no,
That's not the point.
please,
Just
yeah.
want to give the audience sense of
Yeah.
the like size of the problem now, right? Not the full one. So if it's 30% of the territory out of 36 billion, I mean, it's like 10 to 12 billion. Is that the funding necessary to demine the territory that we have access to?
Under current approaches, yes. I think
Hmm.
that's a fair estimation
Okay.
that if we just apply the formulas that the Blair report and other thought leaders have, I agree. And the key is behind that is this, desperate search for innovation that would drive
Hmm.
down those timelines and those expense calculations. And that's very much,
Hmm.
the authors of the report themselves are
Hmm.
driving towards that. And organizations like Halo, in partnership with the Buffett Foundation and others, are very much focused on that as well. So when it comes to, identifying the area that needs to be cleared, that's where AI
Hmm.
models will come in. And that's where I have great hope for where it can take us in terms of driving down costs
Hmm.
and efficiencies. But we're very much in wait and see mode. These models are only being created now. We're feeding the data into them. Like,
Hmm.
Denys, this is your world more than mine, but you got to
Yeah.
feed these AI models vast amounts of data. Fortunately, we have that data. We can do that. And then we have hopes that our partners at AWS, who are very committed and passionate about this, will be able to drive identification of mine lines for us in
Hmm.
ways that will
Hmm.
increase our efficiency. So there's that. But then there is the challenge of actually clearing what is identified as truly that area that you can't ignore. You can't tell the farmer to get into this area of his field. Hopefully, he's out plowing the other 90%. But those are still very large numbers that have to be cleared, and that's where you get
Hmm.
into these kind of comparisons to the rest of the mine action world. In that, we had hoped to have Paul Heslop on this call. I mentioned that if anyone knows of Halo, they know of us because of Princess Diana. Paul Heslop was a Halo employee back in 1997. He was the guy
Hmm.
standing next to Princess Diana in that historic photo. And there are
Hmm.
still another 1,000 minefields to go in Angola,
Hmm.
30 years on. So we don't want that to be the fate of Ukraine.
Hmm.
And fortunately, Ukraine's a place where mechanization at scale works well, in part because of the huge agricultural sector and the experience working with mechanized machines for agriculture. So the solutions in that side of the world, which is more like the traditional side, Denys, that you were highlighting, it's going to be
Hmm.
taking these large quantities of John Deere tractors and Cat bulldozers, and I'm just mentioning a couple of manufacturers because they're ubiquitous when you're going around Ukraine, but others too. All of the different producers of agricultural machinery and construction machinery, and yes, you're putting attachments on the front and sometimes on the side of these things. Those attachments, though, can be innovated and produced and manufactured in Ukraine and can be changed in an iterative fashion
Hmm.
because you have that advanced manufacturing capacity. You've got thought
Hmm.
leadership. You've got the full authority and support of the Ministry of Economy behind it. So I see a huge opportunity in kind of made in Ukraine solutions where you have
Hmm.
hundreds of machines operating across many different operators. So those are going to be sometimes they're going to be commercial construction companies that have added demining as a component. So these would be Ukrainian
Hmm.
small and medium-sized companies,
Hmm.
but using machines that have been innovated
Hmm.
through work that my organization, but the whole sector does,
Hmm.
and that are produced in Ukraine and added on in flexible and cost-effective ways onto that tractor or that bulldozer that's already in country and can be operated in that fashion. So that's something that offers a hope of being able to clear at levels not seen before in a place like Angola or Sri Lanka or some of these other conflict-affected places where the conflict is way in the rear view mirror, but you're still dealing with the landmine problem now. Now that too will require resources, it will require innovation, it will require continued attention by the international community. But fortunately, you've got the talent in Ukraine, you've got the manufacturing capacity, and you've got the eyes of the world on Ukraine, and we need to keep that focus on it.
All right. So you mentioned it's a man-hour problem, right? So have you calculated the man-hours needed, and how does it look in terms of timeline? Like, what do you estimate with the current amount of resources? How long would it take you to demine? And what is the gap? I mean, what is the gap in these 12 billion, let's say? That's like a follow-on question to that.
Well, Denys, you are doing your job as a moderator well, and all of us in the mine action sector need to unpack the numbers behind this more, and this is why we're grateful to the Buffett Foundation and the Blair Institute and others, those in the think tank spaces. CSIS in the think tank in the United States here has done really good work in this space too. We're grateful that we've got the think tank community focusing on kind of the bounding the problem. As operators, we are head down in the minefields doing our work, and we're looking to them as drivers of that broader kind of policy leadership. What I'll say is, because I don't want to, as an operator, as someone who's more field focused in our organization, I don't want to say here's what you can get for 5 billion or here's what you can get for 3 billion. What I know is that the key is bounding the problem, ensuring that you are only clearing the areas that absolutely have to be cleared, and the cost of doing that survey work with or without these AI solutions is the cheapest thing you can do right now. This is something that's in the millions, not the billions. The billions of getting out there and clearing, part of it depends on changes in the nature of the conflict itself, and that when they are looking at the entire problem of Ukraine, they're looking at the Surovikin line, where you have massive industrial scale mine laying done over a period of years. We operate on some of those kind of mine lines in other country contexts, so probably the closest thing to the Surovikin line that is right there in southern Ukraine and across all the way up to Kharkiv would be the cordon sanitaire that was laid by the Rhodesians. So the racist Rhodesian government from the 70s, using South African produced landmines, produced this barrier minefield that was their entire border with Mozambique and Zambia. We're still clearing it now. So that gives you a sense of how long it can take to clear these kind of dense minefields where you have had a chance to truly emplace them, not the lesser densities that we're facing right now in the areas where the Russians were pushed back in the fall of 2022. So looking at all of that, you're gonna have to wait till you get on the mine line itself, and you're going to have to test out how all of these mechanized approaches operate on them. But I have confidence that we're going to see orders of magnitude greater efficiencies than the historical record if we're able to bring the full force of Ukrainian industry and innovation to bear. And that's why we are at this exciting point where you've got the Ministry of Economy, you've got individual entrepreneurs like those who you interact with, Denys, who are trying to, in startup ways, coming up with new solutions. You've got global manufacturers, whether that's the construction and farm machinery companies that I've mentioned, whether it's IT companies like AWS itself. I think we've got to keep the focus of both innovators and producers within Ukraine, but also the global community on the problem.
Great, yeah, you've explained it really well. So I just wanted to make an announcement to the audience that to our webinar attendees, please, if you have questions, feel free to ask and post them in the chat. We'll have some time devoted in the end for the questions of the webinar participants. All right, so basically you're saying that nothing prevents from analyzing the territory right away. So what is like the funding that Ukraine will be able to use this year, and what is the projection for the next year or 2026? I assume it's at least 3-year planning, but it would be great to hear the breakdown if you know.
It's a great question, and unfortunately, because I'm an American and I run the U.S. side of the HALO Trust, I focus very much on what the U.S. government is doing. To date, the U.S. government has, provided about $200 million in funding, largely for the Ukrainian government, as well it should, for the Ukrainian government's capacity for demining. That was out of supplemental funding that has now become difficult for the U.S. government to pass. There will still be U.S. funding for demining, but we've lost a key component, which was the U.S. government's support in a kind of special institutional set of interventions. So there's that challenge. I'll say that global funding for landmine clearance, so you take the whole world, all 60 plus mine impacted countries, the whole global community, US government, UN, everything combined, private funders, it's about $500 million a year. So there is this real challenge of being able to achieve a step change in funding for Ukraine without, utterly, devastating the landmine interventions that are needed in, places like Sudan and Ethiopia, where there are equal numbers of people dying on landmines. So it's going to be a real challenge to ensure that landmine funding is prioritized within the broader set of humanitarian funds and development funds that go towards Ukraine. And it's going to be, it's going to take a lot of effort. Fortunately, we've seen new donors come to focus on Ukraine, or at least on our work. And I can only speak for HALO, whether that's the French government or Luxembourg or the Baltic republics. You've got lots of different countries who are doing everything they possibly can, on top of the U.S. government, who's provided more funding for the sector in Ukraine than anybody else. But from my side, coming back from Ukraine, my challenge is to keep working with Congress to make sure that they know how important this is, not just for Ukraine's benefit. Of course, that's what I care about, but for feeding the whole world, for ensuring stability in food prices that affect Americans going to the grocery store, and for just ensuring that Ukraine can fund its own operations, can fund its own fight. So I'm giving you a really long answer without the specifics that the questioner, quite rightly is pointing out as a need.
Okay, so what more do you think can be done? What more US specifically could do? And is there any issue with capacity? Like how fast, for instance, if we're talking about, producing just the way it is now, or using innovations, how much capacity does Ukraine have? Is there any number on that?
Well, in terms of capacity, I think that the process of actually training a deminer. So if you take that, engineering student who never thought that they would be clearing landmines 2 years ago and was, thinking about their career, if they come through the door for HALO or any other international NGO that does landmine clearance, in a couple of months' time, they can be, given the basic set to start work as a manual deminer, and with additional training on top of that, you can scale up very quickly. And that's why we were able to go from, the 200 deminers that we were able to evacuate out of the Donbass up to 1,200 that we have now. So there's a lot of flexibility and elasticity in the sector, but it is all driven by funding. So I know that there are loan programs that the Ukrainian government is offering, and other funding directly from from the Ukrainian government side that are really targeted towards those small commercial companies that are learning landmine clearance and trying to meet a need. That's important. The key is to ensure that everybody operates under the same safety standards and has access to the same technology. We pride ourselves in working with others in that process. So I think those are some of the challenges. But from my side, the key is one key is prioritization, and that when the U.S. government interacts with the Ukrainian government in this sector, I think that my impression has been they have focused on ensuring that they're responsive to the asks that the Ukrainian government gives them. That's exactly what they should be doing. Just as an American taxpayer, I want to ensure that our government is taking its lead from their Ukrainian colleagues. That's why they've prioritized things like the state emergency services, the special transportation police, others who have this key kind of frontline role. That's how it should be. I think in terms of other donors coming to the table, whether it's other governments who are now focused on Ukraine's needs, or whether it's private donors or others, agriculture is a huge priority from my side, in that it is a major focus of that report that we've discussed. It's key to ensuring that you can deliver the economic goods necessary to meet all of Ukraine's many varied obligations. So in this world in which you're trying to make tough choices with limited resources, I think resource choices that get farmers back into their fields and get exports going is how the sector, from my side, should prioritize itself. And it is indeed in that way, in that we take our tasking from the Ukrainian government. They're making these choices. But I think for those of us who are their partners and have an opportunity to speak to other audiences like this webinar convened today, it's emphasizing the importance of agriculture just for Ukraine's meeting its budget obligations, but for all of these other global equities that we perhaps don't think about.
Yeah, so we actually have a specific question about agriculture. So Lesia Granger is asking how does your work specifically, or maybe broader work of other NGOs, how do you what's the state of cooperation with Ukrainian government, specifically in terms of agriculture, demining, like the special state special transport service, or the military operators, et cetera, et cetera. So would love to hear your view on that.
No, well, I mean, our entire program depends on this, tight cooperation with the Ukrainian government. So the line ministry for demining is actually the Ministry of Defense, and that worked really well. It continues to work well, but they've got a war to fight. So there are other ministries who are coming to the table and playing a key role. So that's Ministry of Interior with the State Emergency Services, Ministry of Economy, which is kind of ensuring synergy and coordination across the sector. And the Ministry of Agriculture, as you mentioned, is another one where we have touch points. From our side, we kind of do the assessment to say, okay, is your land safe to go back in the field after we do our survey process? All right, we do that, or we're clearing that component of your field so that you can get back in it, and keeping you out of it until we've done so. But that next step, I think, is one of the things that I am really eager to see, and was glad to see that the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv has been focusing on creating better synergy between kind of ag restoration programs, which are run, at least, or the funding from them from the U.S. side comes from the U.S. Agency for International Development, and they don't do demining. So, it's sometimes hard for us to integrate our work with, their loan programs that would, benefit that farmer who needs to get back out on that land quickly, because that's the end goal we're looking at. We're looking for is not just to clear mines and to give you the count of explosives that we've cleared. It's to get the farmer back in their field. So I think that there is a lot of good cooperation going on the ground. I think it's gotten better since over the last 2 years or so, particularly those kind of ensuring that there's a handoff to other support that the farmers need. But it's going to require a lot more attention.
And hence our next question from the audience. So it's a combined question from two anonymous attendees. But basically the question is challenges, and specifically regulatory challenges. Are there any, and what's the state there?
There are a lot of regulatory challenges. I mean, I would say that one of the challenges we have is there isn't a national standard for armoring equipment. It's that we are able to use autonomous equipment, so or remotely operated or autonomous equipment. This is, those kind of big agricultural machineries with a tiller or something else on the front or something else on the side that's dealing with a landmine threat that Denys was talking about. But quite frankly, the fastest way to get that capability up and running in the way that and there's certain efficiencies in how it's used, is actually having an operator in the cab and armoring that asset. That's something that we do in programs around the world, but Ukraine doesn't have a standard for armoring, and as a result, none of the operators like us are able to use armored machines. We just have to use remotely operated machines, and there's some advantages and disadvantages to that. So that's one example. There are others that we confront all the time, just in terms of what are the processes that require certification across different ministries, because when you're working and you're dealing with Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Interior, and Ministry of Defense, and requiring approvals across those ministries, it's difficult to do that in any country context, much less in Ukraine in the midst of a war.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going deeper into the technology questions. So there is a question about the safety of AI used in the algorithm that you use, and is it a regulatory challenge, if at all?
Good question. We're not there yet, because we're at the point of feeding these AI models that we may indeed have to navigate regulatory issues around. From our side, it is we view it as just kind of using the machine to do what the human analysts would normally do, and also it doesn't take away the need for those human analysts. We're going to have more needs for human analysts. It's just they're going to be using AI to accelerate their work. So from our side, it's just showing us a mine line on a screen in ways that use different imagery and combine it in new ways. But in terms of how that fits into what is a set of global challenges around regulating AI, we'll have to navigate those as they come up.
All right. So I guess what we'll do is we'll have two last questions from the attendees, and we'll then wrap up. So on technology, there is a related question. If you do R&D yourself, and do you work with startups? If they could, so if you have any approach to that, and if so, what's the best way to reach out to you on that?
Well, we do work with startups on occasion. I mean, I would say that for the most part, because for our core operations, we have to purchase equipment that is already available in the marketplace. So there's there's some challenges that we have in working with startups. But when it comes to innovation and thinking, scoping the problem and helping inform solutions that a startup may be considering, we'd be more than happy to be in those discussions. We do have a research and innovation team that's based in Ukraine. It's the only program in the world that has its own research and innovation team because of the nature of the challenge there, but also because we can get so many wonderful, tech savvy and engineering savvy employees. So I would be more than happy to connect them either to the team in Ukraine or to our global innovation hub. It's a good question.
So I assume people can reach out directly to you. Yep.
Feel free to, or through Mike as well.
Thanks. So we'll have the last question, and then we'll let you go to do your, frankly, very important work. And again, thank you for doing this. So do you work with any ecological restoration organizations? So EU recently has passed nature restoration law, and it says, and its intended targets are to restore at least 20% of Europe's marine and terrestrial land by 2030, and its endangered habitats by 2050. Is that something that Halo Trust is involved in, or
we work very much alongside a number of whether it's the UN system, so like the FAO, Food and Agricultural Service of the UN, is very much focused on kind of how conflict affects land, and so we're often working alongside them. But also any number of think tanks and other organizations, and we welcome those opportunities. In that, from our side, what we bring to the table is a perspective from the field, of all the craters in the areas that we operate, and knowing the nature of explosive impact on the fields in which we're working. The kind of work that happens after that fact in restoring that land. I think fortunately that there isn't a lot of research that has been done so far. I think there's a lot more coming in Ukraine. But in general, when you look across the arc of landmine affected countries, the specific impact seen so far of explosives on future productivity of agricultural lands and things like that, so far in those other country contexts has been seen to be minimal. I think that there's some really smart organizations that are doing work on what that impact looks like in Ukraine to ensure that there's a full body of science behind it. But we're always looking to partner with other organizations to ensure that next mile, the actual restoration, takes place. So good question. And Denys, thanks for your moderation, and Mike, thanks for hosting today.
Great.
Thank both of you for this very informative discussion today about humanitarian mining in Ukraine. Chris, you've given us a lot to chew on here, and congratulations to Halo Trust for all the work that it's doing around the world. And just in passing, I also want to give a shout out to the Howard Buffett Foundation, because I don't know if many people realize that the Howard Buffett Foundation will be donating over $300 million to humanitarian aid to Ukraine this year. And overall, since the war began in 2022, the tally is close to 800 million. So that report that we cited before is just one example of the kinds of projects that they've been working on, and we hope they will continue. And on behalf of the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation, I want to thank all of you for coming to the webinar today, or the fireside chat, as Denys called it. And if you have any questions about the webinar, it will be up on YouTube within the coming days. And if you want to get in touch with Chris Whatley, you can always contact me at Mike Burak at mburacassociates.com, or you can send email to the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation. Again, thanks for attending today, and until next time, that's all for now.
Thanks. All the best.
Thanks.